So I'm Marshall Van Alstyne. I'm a professor at the business school where I've been for more than 10 years. It's been there for a little while, so I can tell you where the various bodies are buried, things of that sort. Most of what I work on is the economics of information. You can think of this also as the information product design. How do you price information goods? How would you price privacy? The other things of that. How does it change the structure of industries or the platform business models that we're using today? What I really want to talk about today is big data, AI, and privacy. To give you an example, and I'm going to use all of the pictures here, all generated by AI. So many of you may have seen a lot of these different kinds of things been trained on hundreds of millions of documents. Matter of fact, there's something like 750 billion parameters in these different models. But to do this, they've actually had to use the copyrighted material of lots of different artists. Probably your information has been used to train these particular models. This has led folks like Sarah Silverman, the comic, John Gresham, the author, or the Authors Guild and Writers Guild, to sue Facebook, OpenAI, Midjourney, and Stability AI. Use of other people's data for such things isn't a new phenomenon. Many of you may know the More Spleen story, where someone used the doctor took out his spleen and patented a cell line on it. Or maybe some of you may know the AIDS story, where a US team patented an AIDS test using a French serum, and they didn't include the French. Or some of you may have used 23andMe, the data source on your gene background. They used the survey data that you may have provided, and they filed a patent on a Parkinson's test, and they haven't shared that back with any of the folks. So that's not new. Another element to it that's not new is that tends to cut down on information sharing. The Moore case and the AIDS case wound up in court. These are winding up in courts. New York Times, Reddit, Stack Overflow, Twitter, all shut down their APIs. Why? Because they're worried about now their information is being used to train these other things. And they're now the suits are now on copyright infringement, unjust enrichment of third parties, and unfair competition. Your own resources are being used to compete against you. And how many of you know there's going to be a new James Dean movie out there? It might as well be called not, Rebel Without a Cause, but Rebel Without a Source Code, because James Dean died in 1955. So they're going to be doing a new version of this. This creates some kinds of problems with our current intellectual property regimes. What happens if the defendants win, if the AI companies win, Facebook, OpenAI? Well, if that's the case, you might wind up destroying the livelihoods of the Sarah Silvermans or the John Grishams or you and I in the world. Also, that means that you see the stop sharing access. Lots of different organizations will try to close down the mechanisms for sharing information. What happens if the plaintiffs win? Well, then that could shut down technological innovation. And if you're going to train an AI system, how in the hell are you going to negotiate with tens of millions of copyright holders? So whether we're using an intellectual property regime, which has the negotiations problem, or we're using open source regime, which has that you can't make money on it problem, how are we going to go after that particular problem? Some of the research we're proposing is actually perhaps an intermediate solution. You might call it a fairness regime. It's actually based on some liability rules as opposed to property rules. The first portion of it would give you permissionless innovation. You maybe use things that are out in the public, but if you actually wind up creating value, then you're responsible for sharing a proportion of that value. Now, you might think that would be a hard problem, but it turns out we even have a formula to do that. It was actually a Nobel Prize winning formula by Lloyd Shapley, who won the prize for it, shared with a couple other Nobel Prize winners. And this is the formula. It basically asks if there's a collection of assets to which your asset adds value, you get that marginal value add. To give you a quick example, I asked ChatGPT to tell us a joke in the style of Sarah Silverman. And I said, okay, I was reading an article about how they're teaching AI to understand humor. And I thought, oh, great. Now robots will tell jokes better than me. But hey, let's get real. It's going to take them a while to master sarcasm. Okay, so at least now maybe they'll owe Sarah Silverman a little bit extra after borrowing her material on this. The point here is that we may be able to use fairness to actually increase the rate of innovation. We're actually working with corporations to see if you could actually build on other people's CAD/CAM tools, or you might be able to build on their software, or for an ed tech, you might be able to build on other syllabi. but the original source will always be compensated. One of the things we've proven formally is you may actually be able to increase social welfare in terms of being able to increase the rates of innovation and also even the distributed decentralization on the innovation. And you're going to get more folks to share. For those of you that are interested, the paper is available. It's up on SSRN, so it's there. One last point that's kind of fun. In information economics, we don't just look at some of the true information, we also look at some of the false information. So if you want to talk about some of the methods for dealing with fake news, I'm delighted to talk in the on the on-tap session, the portion afterwards. Thank you.